So I don't think Zack needs any more of an introduction. I think that the film speaks for itself, and I think that everyone in this room was probably blown away by his ability to tell the story of Kinder Morgan in such a powerful way. So thanks a lot again, Zack. Mike Souza, at the end there, is the managing editor of the National Observer and one of the best investigative journalists you will ever meet. He is a specialist in filing targeted access to information requests and holding governments and corporations to account. He has covered national politics for more than a decade and in recent years focused on energy and environmental issues. In 2017, Mike won a Canadian Association of Journalists Award for his investigation that exposed a conflict of interest scandal in the federal review of the Energy East pipeline project. Mike's journalism caused a long delay in the Energy East review process and helped expose just how broken that process for pipelines had become. Most recently, Mike raised allegations that Canada's review of the Kinder Morgan project was rigged. Mike's report revealed that the federal cabinet had predetermined the approval of Kinder Morgan and secretly instructed public servants to provide a legally sound basis for saying yes to the pipeline, even though the government was still consulting First Nations and the public and weighing the costs, risks, and benefits of the pipeline. These revelations have led to new court challenges by the Tsleil-Waututh First Nation and could potentially result in the pipeline's approval being overturned. And Mike, I know there's probably a giant stack of access to information requests on your desk right now, so please keep doing what you're doing. Robyn Allan is an independent economist. You probably noticed her in the movie. She's held many executive positions in the private and public sector, including president and CEO of the Insurance Corporation of BC, vice president finance for Park Lane Ventures, and senior economist for the BC Central Credit Union. Robyn was an expert intervener on economics, risks, and commercial need at the NEB's Trans Mountain Expansion project review process, and was an expert witness on economic and insurance issues related to the Northern Gateway Pipeline project. In 2015, Robyn withdrew in protest from the NEB's review of the Kinder Morgan project, arguing that the regulator was not acting as an impartial referee and that the outcome of the review is predetermined. So if you're ever looking for reading material that completely eviscerates government and industry claims about Kinder Morgan's economic case, I strongly recommend you check out Robyn Allan's work. So thanks again to all three of you for being here. We have a huge wealth of knowledge on this panel, so we'll get right to your burning questions. We have about half an hour after the movie to get through questions and comments and have a good conversation together. If you have a question to ask, you can raise your hand, and there's a couple of environmental defense employees that can give you a mic. Jesse and Farah, they're right at the back there. Let's try to keep questions short. There's a lot of people that probably have questions and comments. We'll cut you off if you're rambling on a question. And there's going to be also some time after the panel. There's going to be a reception to chat with the panelists as well. But I am going to kick things off with just one question before we move into the audience. And it's going to be a bit of an Energy East plug since environmental defense was so involved in the Energy East campaign. And the question is, opposition to pipelines seems to be one thing that really unites Canadians from coast to coast, whether it's Kinder Morgan and Northern Gateway on the west coast or Energy East on the east coast. So what do you guys think are the key similarities and differences that we see right now between the recently canceled Energy East pipeline and Kinder Morgan?
Well, I think that what we're seeing happening around these pipelines is that, they are being characterized or described as oil pipelines, but they're not. They're diluted bitumen export pipelines. And the reason that that's happening is because there has been a lot of investment in the oil sands. It's not necessarily particularly economically viable, as Robyn can speak more to. And in shorthand, they're having a fire sale. They need to get that stuff out of the ground and get a bit of cash flow and recoup some of those investments. And I think that what we're also seeing is that Canadians are starting to take more responsibility for their environment, for holding their governments to account, and the complexity of the situation is not being lost on Canadians and the First Nations right now, and people now have the means to push back, to get informed, to research, to connect, and to hold our governments to account in new ways.
I think I just wanted to say about the difference in the process as well, to underscore what Zack said of Trans Mountain and Energy East. Trans Mountain was the first hearing in the history of the National Energy Board where a contested project for a pipeline was not given cross-examination, so that you couldn't test the evidence and you couldn't have people under oath telling the truth about what they were presenting. Whereas when Energy East was set up, the hearing order actually had cross-examination brought back in. Cross-examination was a Northern Gateway, as I said, every other one. And I think what happened with Energy East, because things were being exposed about how clearly biased the process was, that the proponent knew that under a proper due diligence process, where scrutiny was served, the project could not go forward. And we didn't have that with Trans Mountain. So that's one of the key differences, is that had Trans Mountain had proper due diligence, I think it would be very unlikely it would have been recommended for approval.
Certainly, I would say as a journalist, we've been looking at the process, and as Robyn was just explaining, we have seen in terms of the reporting we've done at National Observer, a number of cases where the process, where it's not clear what the rules are, or it would appear that the rules are not entirely being followed. It's important to have scrutiny on regulators, on governments as they review massive multi-billion-dollar projects. It doesn't mean that every project has to be rejected, and certainly, I'm not here to take any position for or against any project, but what we do is we look at whether the rules are being followed, and in the case of both Energy East and in the Trans Mountain, the reporting that we did at National Observer, we found a lot of examples and evidence that processes were not followed, and I think that is one common theme that we're seeing in terms of the way that people view these projects. Suddenly, we can go into a long discussion about the different the different campaigns that have started to be mounted against pipeline projects in the absence of climate change action, or national or international climate change action, which is bringing more scrutiny to these projects. But certainly, a lot of the opposition is being driven, as Zack has highlighted in the movie. There's this theme about communities, whether communities are granting permission, and certainly a lot of the opposition that I think happens to these projects is driven by the communities that see this going through their backyard. They want to make sure that the projects are safe, and again, there's a lot of rules that have to be followed to ensure that these projects would be safe.
Okay, thank you. So I think we should open up questions to the audience now. So just raise your hand and we can get you a mic. Yes, right here.
Hey, I just want you guys to each speculate wildly about what happens in the next few weeks and months. Thank you.
Go for it.
With regard to Kinder Morgan,
yeah,
with
Kinder
regard
Morgan's
to
gonna walk, right? Crystal ball.
So, what I think about first and foremost is not this May 31st deadline. I'm thinking about the Federal Court of Appeal, and I'm thinking of its review of the challenge launched by First Nations, which several of them, as you know, Hillary Beaumont from Vice News. Thank you for the question. Several of these First Nations have alleged that the federal government has not respected its constitutional duty under Section 35 of the Constitution to consult in a meaningful way. Now, as the Federal Court of Appeal reviews this, it ultimately has the power to decide whether the government's actions were legal. Now, a lot of people are talking about the rule of law, particularly with regard to protests that are, or the actions of the BC government, whether this is following the rule of law. I think the most important thing in this case is in this file is what happens with that Federal Court of Appeal decision. There is evidence, I think, that we have found that indicates that the process wasn't meaningful. I think that this could be a significant factor. Now, ultimately, I think that there is, the federal government does seem to be determined to find a way to get a pipeline built to the West Coast. And I'm not ruling out the possibility that if they redo the process, if there's a new owner that comes into place, that there is a possibility of some kind of a West Coast pipeline going ahead, and maybe that might end up being a better project, safer project than what we have right now. But I think that is a possibility, not necessarily in the next year, but it might be several years down the road.
Wild speculation. No, I think one of the issues about this is what happens if all of our institutional arrangements to properly be able to respond to not building this project, that this project does not make economic, financial, or environmental sense. So what if all of the safeties that we have built into our institutional framework fail? And that means that we are dealing with the people. And I think one of the very important things for people across Canada to understand is that in order to get the pipeline built, the authorities of municipalities and provinces have been trampled on. And if that can happen there, it can happen anywhere in Canada. And, often we will talk in BC, well, if this was going through Montreal, it wouldn't happen. And, I think there's a lot of truth to that. Energy East faced a much greater currency in terms of political power in the East. And what I think we're going to recognize as Canadians is that we all have to step up and make sure that the voices are heard, that this is a serious issue for thoughtful Canadians that understand it needs to be known. And if all of our sort of wildly speculate to all of our institutions failing us in having a sound and reasoned decision on this, it will be in the streets. And I think in British Columbia very clearly, there's a significant amount of power that will do whatever it takes to have justice served.
Well, in regards to I would say what's foremost on my mind right now is the fate of Alberta energy workers. So many politicians have really made this their cause to get this pipeline built, and so many promises have been made along those lines that I think if it doesn't get built, I am fearful of what the response politically and socially will be. We're already seeing this sort of brinkmanship, turning off the taps to BC in this retributive action, and I think that will continue hurtling us towards more and more polarized political discourse. I hope that it will be unfeasible for them to actually move forward with this particular project, because I do think it is a bad project. It would be great to see if Canada does want to backstop the energy economy. It would be great if they were investing more in our energy security here, refining capacities here, and making sure that we were getting as much value as possible out of our energy resources in order to fund the transition to the low carbon economy that we need. We know that that 7 times more jobs are created from investments in clean energy. The point that I really want to drive home to people is that diluted bitumen is dangerous not only to the environment but to Canadian energy workers. And I think they've been sold a false bill of goods here. And I think we really need to highlight that as an issue so that we can get on the same side.
Yeah, I agree with what a lot of the other panelists have said, and I do think that the Federal Court of Appeal ruling that might come next month is going to cause some other delay, whether it's a year or 2 in the project, that could make it unviable and make Kinder Morgan pull out. I also think that Kinder Morgan might be trying to set itself up to be in a position to sue the federal government for a project that has received regulatory approval, but then cannot proceed. So they might try to use NAFTA Chapter 11 to sue the federal government, the way we saw TransCanada try to sue the US government when Obama put the stop on Keystone XL. And also, just to take a step back from Kinder Morgan, there are 2 other pipeline projects currently still in play. There's TransCanada's Houston XL to the US, and there's also Enbridge's Line 3. Both would allow several 100,000 barrels of oil per day to be exported from Alberta. So I think there's a bit of a recognition in the oil industry now that growth will be constrained, and if one of those other projects gets approved, it takes the pressure off the other projects. So I think those other companies, Enbridge and TransCanada, are waiting to see how Kinder Morgan plays out, and the same is true as those other 2 companies, because only one is needed, and hopefully 0 are going to get built. Right here in the middle.
Hi, my question is for Zach. That was an amazing film. Thank you so much for being here. Sorry. Thank you. Hi. How's it going? My question is for Zach. Thank you so much for being here tonight. That was an amazing film. So you mentioned in the beginning of the film that you were in Ottawa last night, the federal seat, and some MPs were in the audience. My question is, do you feel like your voice was heard? What was the reaction? And maybe which MPs were present?
Democrats.
Let's see. Well,
Any Liberals?
No Liberals. There were Liberal staffers there. I think that there was a lot of staffers there, and then there was a handful of MPs. So I'm having trouble recalling who was there. Finn Donnelly was there. Jenny Kwan, and there was Rankin.
Yeah,
Marie Rankin. And then 3, yeah, okay. And then there was, a number of staffers there, and I guess people had told me not to expect too many MPs to get there, just because it's such a difficult, it's such a live wire right now. But that there could be a way of really influencing the conversation that's happening with all of the staffers and advisors. The conversation was really lively, really engaged. It's an incredible honor to be able to play a film like this that's critical of our government in our own parliament. I think it speaks to the incredible opportunity and privilege that we have to live in this country, to bring these messages forward. I saw it as an exercise in my democratic right to do that, and in all of our democratic right that we must exercise in order to keep it active and viable. So that was fantastic. And in terms of the making of the film, it's a team sport. I'm up here, but Devin is in the room too, and he and I have been working on this, and as well as many others who have contributed to this along the way and given incredible dedication to the subject. So thank you for your compliment and question.
And we had a question right up front here from Olivia. I'll just give you my mic. It's probably easier.
Winning hearts and minds of people, a big part of it is the hearts. Have you come across stories, not facts and figures, but really moving, touching stories about how not necessarily just climate change affecting our lives, floods and wildfires, which is in your film, actual people that lose their farm, lose this. Have you been able to capture? Do you have some of that? Maybe one or two really moving ones that some of us can use, because here in Toronto, trying to get people to pay attention to this is hard. We're trying to get people to show up to their MP's office in the Protect the Water campaign, and it's hard to get people out, right? So, is there anything that we could use, like short things that resources that we could use that could actually get to people that are not? They're not necessarily the converted. The converted is already on side. The people that are not too sure about things.
Well, we've attempted to do that, Devin and I, through our social media videos. You can see a lot of those on Directly Affected. There's a really fantastic Years of Living Dangerously is a really well-produced micro. They make really great micro videos, so about a minute and a half, and just short stories about what's happening with the reality of climate change. In terms of getting people to pay attention to this issue, in my mind, people are so sort of in survival mode right now. It's a big ask, and I think that that's what's happening in Alberta as well. Is people are in survival mode. It's tough to extend the horizon. So how is it that we do the work of satisfying basic needs so that we can start to answer larger questions? I'm working on it. It's a work in progress, but I wish I had a better answer, but it's where it's at right now. Keep creating and moving forward and calling on inspiration and then following through with action. I think all of us need to answer that call when it comes to us and to have those conversations, not shy away from them right now.
Sure. Well, I would say, it is terrific to see so many people out here who want to learn about the issue and talk about it. What Zack said earlier about polarization, I think it is important to listen to all the stories, whether it's someone losing their home or whether it is a worker in Alberta who has been without work or who is searching, to try to listen and understand and find the right way to speak to the concerns that they have. I have concerns when I see a group like the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers that is running on all their social media channels this Canada's Energy Citizens, in which I think that they are, in terms of the messages, if you look at their Facebook page, it's billed as a grassroots effort, and unless you look carefully, you won't see that it is actually from the largest oil and gas lobby group in Canada. The types of messages that they're posting there, they're getting into personal attacks. There was images last week of some of the protesters in Seattle, in which they're highlighting, okay, look at their clothes, look at how they got there. They're all using oil, and yet they're protesting oil. It's trying to generate a personal attack. There's, they've been running another campaign protesting David Suzuki being granted an honorary degree at the University of Alberta. Is that really the role of an oil and gas industry lobby group, to be promoting these types of messages? They've built up a following of 220,000 people on Facebook. They are acting like a news agency, spreading news and driving it to the point where after we did our reporting on Kinder Morgan, we were getting nasty messages, I presume, from the same group of people that were getting animated or agitated. And to the point where we personally had a threat mentioning our Ottawa office address and my name, just for doing the work that I'm doing. And I think, if when we see things like this, being able to listen and try a dialogue. Avoid the knee-jerk reaction of just getting angry at these people, but trying to understand where they're coming from. That might be the way towards solutions. Like last week, I was in Burnaby on the mountain at the gates where there was a worker. He was 69 years old. He had kids. He had grandkids, and as he was driving in, he backed into one of the tents that some of the land and water protectors had set up. And the immediate reaction, someone climbed up onto the truck, threw coffee at his face, and it just, that kind of tension is not helpful. What this guy needed was just someone to listen. I mean, there's a role that journalists play in listening to these people and trying to hear what they're saying, asking them questions about where their opinions are coming from, and trying to understand. And these are the ways. But again, it's great that all of you are here listening. I mean, journalists, we will keep writing and trying to ensure that there's evidence out there. But I think it's up to everyone here to look at all these stories and make sure you talk to your neighbors, your friends, share them, and help us help you.
I'd just like to add to that in terms of a short fact, 170,000 workers in Alberta are unionized, and they're represented by the Alberta Federation of Labour. And all those workers do not want the project because of the jobs that will be lost. So we have in Alberta Premier Rachel Notley saying the project will create jobs, and the people that really know what the situation is, 170,000 of them have voted against it. So there's a mismatch there. There's a disconnect about what people are saying and what we're being told by leadership that wants the project. So I think that's an interesting, 170,000 workers in Alberta would like to see the project not be built. Then the other interesting fact about the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, they produce the supply projections that are relied on in these hearings, and consistently that methodology overinflates projections of supply. So I was working on getting at the root of that problem and asked some questions of the party that does the forecasting, and the next thing I know, I'm told I have to send every question through their lawyer. So access for me to information is cut off. And to me, that just is encouraging, because we're really close to getting the facts out. If such efforts will be gone to create news agencies to make sure that the facts aren't checked, that we're very close to getting the information out. And as Mike says, I encourage you, there are lots of stories out there that are being recorded as this thing unfolds, including documentary.
Yeah, and just to add to stories that get people engaged in the climate movements, what we found at Environmental Defense with our work on Energy East is that it wasn't always the climate message that struck home with people. It was oil spills or concerns about local effects or species at risk or indigenous rights. And through engaging people on those issues, they become involved in the climate movement, and we built allies that way. So I think sometimes it's just best to not lead with the climate message and talk about what people care about locally. There's a question down here. It's been up for a while. Yeah. Sorry, I should choose people that aren't so far away from me.
Could you explain that a little bit? My understanding was that what you just said about jobs being lost, I thought they were opposed to it because that it wouldn't be refined on site, and so opportunity costs, right? Jobs wouldn't be created that were career jobs. So could you just expand? I didn't realize jobs were actually being lost. Oh,
thank you. The fact is that Alberta had a strategy back many number of years ago to take the heavy oil and upgrade it. And they figured that they would have 80% of the heavy oil upgraded in Alberta and turned into synthetic crude oil, which is a light oil that can go into most refineries. And if you're doing that with 80% of your product, then the upgraders and the activity that has to take place to do that creates a significant number of jobs. When, back in about 2008, and we had the financial crisis, the plans changed. And they moved off the value added in Alberta to taking the raw product and shipping it out. Now, for example, with Trans Mountain, there are 90 jobs, permanent jobs, for 890,000 barrels a day of oil. If you put that into 3 upgraders, you've got probably 15,000 jobs, permanent, long-term, well-paying. And so by changing the strategy of how to produce the product, they have basically hollowed out the economy of Alberta.
So I'm being told we have time for one more question, and I'm going to choose this woman over here.
Thank you. I have 2 questions, and you could choose which one you want to answer. Sorry, I have 2 questions, and you could choose which one might interest you to answer. One is I follow very closely and been involved with Bill C-69, and I'm wondering if you think that there's any connection with it. This is for people who might not be familiar with the numbers. This is the federal government's new legislation on environmental assessment, which includes discussion of the National Energy Board and other things. So I'm wondering if anybody has any comments on that. And the other question that I'm looking for comments on is what you said, Michael, what you said about the personal threat. I'm wondering, that is a part of what we are all doing right now. If we are on the front line, we're facing that in a number of struggle areas, very forcefully. And I'm wondering how any of you have learned to deal with that emotionally, what strengths you're calling on. So there's 2 questions, and I don't expect you to answer them both.
Okay. I think the easier one is C-69.
Forgive my emotional tone.
Environmental laws were significantly changed in 2012. Essentially, a lot of the federal oversight was taken away in a 400-page bill that was introduced. Olivia was there by the former Harper government, and I guess in the last election campaign, I think what were then the opposition parties had campaigned to restore, both the NDP and the Liberals had campaigned to restore what was changed. There have been some changes reversed in what the Liberal government has proposed, and some new things, including replacing the National Energy Board, changing its structure, changing its makeup, the way that people are appointed there. All of these things could be quite interesting in terms of taking away the culture that has resulted in a lot of ex-industry people or people with very close industry ties winding up as the political appointments running that board. Now there are systemic, I've written about the National Energy Board substantially over the past couple of years. There are a lot of systemic problems that I've found with management that I don't know can necessarily be addressed with the changes introduced by the government. There's some significant changes in terms of the way that they operate, from everything from how they spend public money to how they issue contracts. There's certainly challenges in terms of following the rules there. There's a new impact assessment agency that's being created. They're changing the way major projects are reviewed back to kind of the system that it was before 2012 with joint assessments. So all of these things could be interesting, but they've kept, in terms of some of the legal changes that are being proposed, instead of making it entirely based on evidence and allowing public servants to do an independent review of projects, there is still this provision that lets the minister decide or express an opinion. Is that species really at risk, or will this really be detrimental? And giving that power to ministers or political politically elected people is, well, I mean, it's certainly, I think we can question whether that's the best system or whether we should leave this to scientists. But, you know, certainly this is a political debate. I don't think so, because it's not going to be retroactive. Yeah, so it wouldn't apply to Kinder Morgan. But if you know, in terms of this federal court of appeal case, if the decision of the government is reversed, if they're forced to start consulting again, and if the company walks away, which there's a lot of signs, as Robyn has highlighted in some of her recent commentary and ratings, if the company walks away, then you could have a new review process under new rules that will make it difficult, or much more difficult for projects like this perhaps to go ahead. Now, I can briefly address just the issue of how we deal with it. You know, there's certain training that we do. We do get advice. You know, in my case, we did go to police, and you know, there's different types of support. I have dealt with a lot of angry comments. I mean, I've been writing about the oil and gas industry for more than 10 years, and not everyone has always been pleased with what evidence that I bring to light, or in terms of public relations, in terms of relationship between industry and government. So I'm used to certain reactions. I wasn't used to, you know, certainly wasn't exceptional to see someone writing an office address in a message. But I just have to keep doing my job and just focusing on knowing that there are many unanswered questions, many things to investigate, a huge pile of papers on my desk that I need to get through, and I can just focus on that and not worry about the rest. I mean, I worry about the people I work with and want to make sure that they're safe and comfortable, but everyone is professional, I think, in our organization, so I'm grateful for the people that I work with, and I'm grateful for, you know, the readers that also encourage and inspire us to do the work that we're doing.
Can I thought your question as well was about yourself on the front line. Is that?
No, it's about all of us.
All of us.
The
Yeah.
abuse that we experience.
Yeah. So I would just add a little bit to that. And I actually have been extremely fortunate. I have not experienced a lot of vitriol. However, in those situations, the commitment gets tested as to what we're trying to accomplish here, which is to make a path that we can all profit from it and have a better society than the one that we arrived in. So I think that the anger and the pushback and the personal comments that come are from a place of fear. People are not clear that it's safe to move away from what we know, and that recognizing that they don't feel safe, that it's not really personal, that it's not at us really, that those things become very helpful, and to get a community of others that are doing what you're trying to accomplish, and make sure that you have that kind of more of a safety in numbers as you move through whatever actions you decide to take to try to make a difference. That can really give you just a little bit more support for the commitment.
I would echo what Robyn shared there, is that it's really important to listen underneath what it is that people are expressing, even if it is violence. People are feeling pushed into a corner and that there's no options. And so, when people get into fight mode, survival mode. And so, but this has happened throughout human history. Think about the great thinkers that have been jailed for, suggesting that potentially the Earth is round, or that, that we actually orbit around the sun. People push back against an idea that has had its day and that maybe is shifting. So we need to be brave, just have courage and move forward and not feed into it and not react to it, because that will certainly ignite more of it, I think. So sort of understanding how to use judo, how to redirect energy as opposed to fight back directly with it.
So unfortunately, we have to cut it off there, but you are welcome to stay in chats in the auditorium and outside. Actually, I'm being told it's outside the auditorium afterwards. But thank you again to our panel for being here tonight.